The crunching leaves cut through the sea of dense fog, and Michael found himself lumbering further into the darkness, unable to recall the events that led him to where he stood. His mind was a jumbled mess, and his body fared no better, having little strength to place one foot in front of the other. Then from beyond the gloom, rising up like twisted fingers reaching out of the earth, a dark forest appeared in the distance. The night brings with it the sounds of nocturnal life, the countless skittering and slinking creatures that buzz, flap, and crawl under the light of the moon. But tonight, with ears strained and eager to listen, there was nothing. Absolute silence and stillness. Not even the swaying of trees or rustling of the leaves. A sense of urgency bubbled up from deep within. He hadn't noticed it at first, but it began to fester until sickness rose to the surface, and his stomach tightened into a knot. Then his body broke out into a cold sweat, and he was overcome with a terrible sense that he was not alone. From the unbearable silence came forth a rustling in the bushes that caught Michael off guard, sending him leaping into the air. He strained to focus on the source through the billowing fog that surrounded him, but at the edge of his vision, rising up from their hiding places, he could see shadows shifting in the hazy darkness, figures now standing tall. Their bodies were pressed together, limbs seemingly entangled but moving past one another, ever closer. Their glowing eyes watched him, the emptiness of the forest speckled with the light from their eyes in every direction. There were so many. Michael found himself rooted to the ground, unable to move or react as the deformed shadows closed the gap, drawn out tentative steps that seemed to play out in slow motion. And then, paired with their movement, they called out. Such haunting voices. He could feel the despair in those sounds, a raspy wail that sent shivers throughout his whole body. But it was the cold breath at the nape of his neck that sent him pushing past the figures and further into the forest. In that moment, he had lost all sense of reason. Bright red streaks peeled across the void above, branches snapping all around him as he ran without hesitation, ran without stopping, unsure if the echoing footsteps were his own. The bruised sky opened up and a downpour soon followed, the likes of which he had never seen before. The cold rain pelted down with such terrible force that he wondered for a moment if maybe it was hail. His screams engulfed the forest, along with those of the wide-eyed beings that reached out. Hunched bodies, deformed and frozen in grotesque positions, their clawed fingers searching the emptiness, longing to connect, longing to be whole again. Faces blurred past him, begging him to stay, and Michael soon realized that some of them were familiar to him. But from where and when, he did not know. He only knew that their only desire, their only need, was to keep him in that dark place with them. He continued running further into the winding maze, but soon he came upon an exit. At the end of that terrible forest was an opening, and beyond that opening stood a lone cabin, his safety, his salvation. A faint light glowed dimly from within, a warm beacon guiding him out of the storm and away from his pursuers. He dug deep, finding the will to push beyond his limits, and miraculously, he found himself standing on the steps of the lonely refuge, fists pounding fiercely on the door. Michael pleaded with anyone inside to open up, anticipating the worst and afraid to look back. Before he could succumb to the monstrosities that followed, the door flew open and he was met with a stranger shrouded in darkness. Michael stood in disbelief for a moment. Some part of him thought no one would have answered and that he would have surely met his grim fate. But what he didn't realize was that there were other plans in store. The stranger gripped the boy tightly by the arm and tossed him inside, landing with a hard thud onto the dusty floorboards. The figure stood before him, illuminated by the bolts of lightning that erupted outside, and as he watched him squirm, a deep voice cut in suddenly through the raging storm.
"What have we here? Lost in the storm, I see,"
he said playfully. The figure paused for a moment and knelt down to eye level with the boy before continuing.
"Well, better make yourself comfortable. You may be here a while."
The man let out a gentle laugh as thunder boomed and the banging on the door intensified, now mingled with the growls and shrieks from those that waited outside. Michael tried to focus on the cloaked figure before him, but could only make out a vague suggestion of form, thin and frightening.
"Come, join me by the candlelight,"
the stranger instructed.
"I have something to show you."
There was no sound as the figure moved through the room, appearing to glide across the ashen floor. Surely his mind playing tricks on him. The cloaked figure set themselves down and gestured with a bony finger for the boy to sit in the open seat. Michael stared in disbelief before rising shakily to his feet. It was then he noticed that his body was trembling uncontrollably, unsure if it was from the fear or the cold. He maintained eye contact while he made his way across the room, floorboards creaking beneath his weight with every timid step. Reluctantly, he dropped into the faded red chair opposite the figure, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to rest. His hands brushed against the armrest, the soft velvet passing under his fingers while he continued to slowly sink back, and the tension in his body lifted and his eyes grew heavy. A soft laughter washed over the cabin, almost inaudible. The stranger paused for a moment, regarding Michael in his current state. Even though the cloaked figure's face was obscured, the boy could feel their stare upon him. The shadowy figure turned to pick up an old tome that sat next to the candle on a small wooden table, littered with various peculiar items. But Michael was drawn to the book. The cover bared the likeness of countless faces, frozen in torment and agony. Then, without warning, the book flew open, and the pages began turning of their own volition. Michael searched deep, gathering every ounce of strength to fight the unseen force being applied to his entire body that kept him weak. But try as he might, he could not even lift a finger. Hope fizzled and the light went out in his eyes, and there he remained, transfixed on the figure's every word. His mind drifted to a place caught between two worlds as a glazed and distant expression settled on the boy's face. The pages suddenly came to a halt, and the stranger slammed their hand down. In a brief moment, the world around them had fallen into silence. Michael watched the dancing flame, the candlelight reflecting unspeakable forms wriggling beneath the tattered cloak. The figure laughed softly before opening his mouth to speak.
I hope you're in no rush to leave. Please make yourself comfortable and settle into your seat. There are many tales within these pages to pass the time.
The dark figure's laughter grew as the storm raged outside of the cabin. Michael was left feeling defeated, merely a passenger in his body, forced to endure the dark stories that the stranger had in store. In that very moment, the boy knew he was doomed.